Good morning, everybody. My name is Kaimi Sinclair. I am your host for this session, Indigenous Perspectives on Dementia and Dementia-Friendly Communities. Before we begin, I respectfully acknowledge that I am sitting on occupied Coast Salish land and that my home and office are located on the homelands of the Duwamish people. I pay respect to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all of my Indigenous relatives. Well, I am honored today to welcome three esteemed panelists who have decades of experience working in the field of Indigenous aging, and I am honored to call them my friends too. We have Becky Bendixen, Dave Baldridge, and Jordan Lewis, and I will have each of them introduce themselves, and I will start with Becky. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you. Kilach Helman, Nordlingada Sakta Cooking, Mea Unanga Cooking. I'm laughing at what your printout is saying as I'm speaking in my own language. In my language, my name was Nordlingada, is Nordlingada, given to me by my grandmother. In English, I am Becky Bendixen from the Unanga tribe in Alaska. And I've been serving Indigenous elders for about 11 years as a employee of the Area Agency on Aging out of Bellingham, Washington.
Thank you, Becky. Jordan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Jordan Lewis. My family are Aleut or Unangang from the native village of Naknek. My dad's side of the family are from Canada Beach, Oregon. I'm honored to be here. I am the Associate Director of the Memory Keepers Medical Discovery Team here at the University of Minnesota Medical School Duluth campus. And I'm excited to see all of you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Dave has joined us. Mary Grace, have you seen Dave?
It looks like he has just arrived.
Oh, wonderful. Wait 1 second.
He's on his way in.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists. We have a few questions we've prepared to ask them for their perspectives, comments, their experience and expertise. So it's very exciting that we have this Indigenous panel this year. So just let me know when Dave.
I think Dave is here.
I'm joined. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Dave. Welcome.
Hey. Sorry to be a little late.
It's okay. We were just introducing ourselves. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get started with the questions.
Okay, I'm Dave Baldridge, a member of Cherokee Nation and a lifetime urban Indian who lives in Albuquerque. I've been in the National Aging Network since 1992, formerly ran the National Indian Council on Aging, and for quite some time have been executive director of IA², the International Association for Indigenous Aging, which I co-founded in '92 with Bill Benson. So enough said, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. So good to see you. And I just got a note, if you're not speaking, could you please mute your Zoom right now? I guess there's some feedback or other noise coming through on the recording. All right, well, let's get started. I'd like to ask the panelists, so how is dementia or memory loss perceived or viewed among Indigenous people in general? And we know there's a lot of heterogeneity among Indigenous people, not only in the United States, but across the world. But in your experience, how is dementia or memory loss perceived in general among Indigenous people? Becky, why don't we start with you again?
Well, thank you. All of my answers come from personal experience. I am not an expert on dementia, just my experience with my mom and her dementia for 10 years. And then, of course, my 11 years being with the Indigenous elders. In the beginning, I found that there was a lot of confusion, a lot of anger about what was happening to the elders as they were experiencing it, because they didn't understand. I didn't find that in many tribal communities, people spoke of dementia very often. If they did, it was in a derogatory way, saying that, oh, he's just crazy. Oh, she's just crazy. But in the past few years, I see that changing, and people are starting to understand that dementia is not a choice, and dementia is real. It is a disease. And I see a lot of tribes really wrapping around the elders and starting to have like the clinic, the elder coordinator, the CHR, all coordinate together to make a protective circle around the elders. And we actually have elders protective teams that keep an eye on those with dementia. So I think we are headed in the right direction. And culturally, we have intergenerational homes. So that is an advantage for us, because typically we would have more than 2 or 3 generations in a home. So grandma's already living with us when she gets to the age where dementia may be creeping in. And that is a definite advantage for the elders, because we can see the changes, we can monitor our way of life to make them safer and to make them feel more comfortable. Because with my mom, she knew there was something wrong with her brain. She would always ask, I don't remember stuff anymore, do I? And it was very, very painful. So I think we have an advantage because we have intergenerational families in one house where we can monitor our elders. Yeah.
Thank you, Becky. How about Dave? How is dementia or memory loss perceived or viewed among Indigenous people in general? What's your experience been, Dave? Oh, you need to unmute.
There, better.
Great.
About 3 or 4 years ago, our nonprofit team at IA², I conducted a national survey of Title VI directors, and we also surveyed nationally tribal health directors. And what we learned in the course of that several months long project for the Alzheimer's Association and CDC was that there is an enormous amount of denial. You know, privacy is such a highly regarded commodity in small reservation communities that people are not always open to sharing if grandma's not acting right. And so that concern for privacy has really been a barrier to us, I think. And consequently, there are very few programs on the ground sponsored by tribes to help families that may be struggling with dementia. And I guess I realize I'm not the cheeriest outlook you're going to hear today, but the medical community, whether IHS or tribal, has been very slow to respond to dementia-related issues, ADRD. They, across the board, are, of course, overwhelmed with COVID, and that continues to be the case. And that's complicated further in that we can't really hold group meetings yet. And so outreach to elders and getting information to and from them and their families has been a barrier that we're continuing to struggle with. But you know, Indian people are so resilient that I'm confident that we'll find a way to come back, but it's being slower than we would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And Jordan, I know you've done work in this area in your research, so please tell us your perspective and experience. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. So I think it's a perfect segue that Dave talked about, kind of building upon research. Most of my experiences, of course, have been based in research studies around cultural constructions of dementia. Our research center here in Minnesota does a lot of that work with First Nations and American Indians and then some of our work in Alaska. And so what we've learned, as Becky has talked about, what Dave has talked about, is either, there's different ways of understanding what's happening, whether it's a natural part of the aging process, thinking about, well, my relatives had the same memory issues, so it's just part of growing older, and thinking about it's not something to be treated. There are other perspectives where it may be more of a spiritual component of aging. It's a gift from God. It's not so much viewed as hallucinations, but your loved one or relative with dementia is seeing their family so they know they're going to a good place. And so that's one way to think about it. Other ways it's perceived, it's the full circle of life. So you start out as an infant, as you go through the behaviors and what happens as a result of dementia, you start exhibiting those behaviors again, you're going back to the beginning, making full circle. And there's other ways of thinking about the causes of dementia. So not only just how it's understood, but people try to figure out, well, what's causing this? Is it environmental food we're eating, subsistence foods, imbalance between our psychological, emotional, spiritual aspects of our life, things we've done in the past that now our higher power is taking our memories away for something we did when we were younger. So there's a lot of different things. I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, I think a lot of different families, a lot of different communities, culture groups have very different perspectives of what's happening. As Dave said, I think the healthcare system could really benefit from getting more understanding of cultural perspectives of dementia, and integrating that into our healthcare system, helping our caregivers and our providers. And so that's what we're learning through our research so far.
Thank you, Jordan. Our next question is, how are people with dementia and caregivers woven into the community or not? So do they tend to be stigmatized and isolated? I think we talked a little bit about that in some communities. Or are they valued and integrated? Jordan, why don't we start with you? So how are people with dementia and caregivers woven into the community or not? And what are some of the perceptions of people with dementia in communities?
So I think Becky did an excellent job mentioning intergenerational housing and homes and families being really supportive of people with dementia, their caregivers, the community members. I would say in most communities I've worked with or I've heard about, they're very supportive. A lot of our smaller communities, kind of like when you're growing up, your parents know you're in trouble before you get home. Same idea is that people look out for their elders. If someone is wandering or seems lost, there's always someone watching out for them to bring them home. I think there's an intergenerational component to what we're learning about dementia. And what I mean by that is our younger generations who may be more aware of medical models of dementia, have been to college, kind of understand more about the cognitive health of brain disease, have a different perspective of how communities work with people with dementia. Whereas our older adults, they're very supportive, they're engaged because they see it as a natural part of the aging process. And the work we've been doing with Alaska Natives, there's this idea that there's internalized stigma, which could lead to isolation, whether that's the person with dementia attributes the disease to bad behaviors when they were younger, or something had gone wrong. That's passed on to their kids and they internalize that, and they feel that people aren't coming around because their grandma did something, or the fear of, is it contagious? Am I going to get it? The lack of education. So while I think most of our communities are supportive, we're starting to see different understandings of what's happening, leading to different situations within family systems.
Thanks, Jordan. So Becky, along those same lines, how are people with dementia and caregivers woven into the community or not? It sounds like sometimes they are because we respect our elders, but then sometimes there's this stigma also. So in your experience, what have you seen in communities as far as integrating elders with possible dementia or dementia into communities? How are there specific programs for elders with dementia, or are they just put with like all elders in the senior centers and community centers?
In the tribes that I serve, I don't know of any specific programs for tribal elders with dementia. We do have dementia support groups here in Bellingham, but they are in town, and to get our tribal elders to go into town is not something they're willing to do. So in my office, we go to the elders, and as a board of director for Northwest Dementia Services, our goal was to bring the support groups and the information to the tribes through my connections, but then COVID hit, so we're all stuck home. I agree with everything that oh my God, I want to call him Justin, but
Jordan.
see, I have dementia.
Jordan.
I was talking to Justin earlier, so okay. Sorry, Jordan. And I know him. How embarrassing. But I agree with everything he says, and there is definitely stigma. People think that if I hadn't been drinking earlier, if I hadn't been smoking, if I hadn't done this, maybe I wouldn't have this now. And a lot of the people in the older generation don't know how to deal with their peers who have dementia. They would rather ignore them and avoid them rather than try to accept that even if she asks you the same question several times, it's only because she doesn't understand. So like I said earlier, I think this stigma is being eradicated by education, but up until then, it wasn't. And Indigenous people have a holistic view of a human being. It's not just the brain, it's your brain, your spirit, your body, your environment. And that has to be taken into consideration when we're educating folks about dementia. But I also read several times that our rate of dementia as Indigenous people is higher than the non-Indigenous. So that's something that needs to be factored into the education that we're bringing out now.
Right. Thank you, Becky. Dave, in your work, in your travels across the country to different communities, have you seen any, particularly good programs for our elders with dementia? And I mean, IHS is challenged with many different things and, small budget. So I'm wondering if any tribes that you have interacted with or have seen have, particularly model sort of programs for their elders with dementia. Be sure to unmute yourself, Dave.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Dementia-Friendly Nevada is a program that was initiated and now continues to operate under the leadership of Dr. Jennifer Carson from the University of Nevada, Reno. And the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe in particular is just doing an outstanding job under their Title VI director, Carla Eben. I should comment that although there are few tribal programs on the ground, dementia is probably, since it's a disease, but it's behavioral in its expression. So the first tribal employees who are likely to notice something might be the Title VI director or the Title VI staff or the CHRs. And it's not likely to be discovered during an annual medical visit, we've learned, but I think Title VI is really beginning to step up to the plate, such as at Pyramid Lake, and really providing some outreach and some services for their elders.
I'm wondering, community health representatives, community health workers play a huge role in tribal communities. I mean, they're funded to offer all kinds of services to tribal members. And I'm wondering, Dave, do you know of any, are there trainings for community health representatives as far as dementia care, caregiving, or Jordan or Becky, do you know of any programs like that for CHRs?
At this point, I'm not aware of, other than at Pyramid Lake, of many other tribal programs that are addressing it, but I think and hope that we'll see more and more of them. I would personally love to see the CHRs more heavily involved. Their ability to be involved with dementia issues varies by the tribe they work for, but I think their eyes on the ground are a really under-recognized resource, and one that we could be making a lot more of.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There we go. There's another project for us, Jordan.
Here we are, more funding.
That's right. That's right. One of our final questions here is, what does a dementia-friendly community look like within Indigenous communities? Becky, let me start with you. What do you think a dementia-friendly community looks like? You talked a little bit about, the wrapping around our elders. Can you speak more to that and how communities can be more dementia-friendly, Indigenous communities in particular? Thanks.
Okay. There's a lot of names, but I use the wraparound circle for that. And it works like the clinic staff are in contact with the CHRs, who are in contact with the Title VI directors, who are in contact with also the youth groups, and they have their directors meet so they can discuss ways that they all can work together to help the elders. And again, the CHRs, they're invaluable. And I really strongly believe that they are underutilized and undertrained in dementia care, dementia awareness, that if we train them, it would really help the elders. And then the youth also, we've been bringing those kids in and using them as, this is really rude, but plants to be around the elder, to get them to talk about their youth and their past, because they don't seem to have problems remembering that part of their lives, but the short-term memory in many of them is affected. And with the youth reaching for that information and pulling it out of them, it helps the elders to feel wanted, to feel needed. They have less isolation, and they feel like they're contributing to their community, which is really important, because as the dementia progresses, many elders don't know what's wrong or what's happening, but they have this sense of, I'm being disconnected from everything that I am, that I have, and that I was. So I really like the circle of care we got going around this area for our elders. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. And we know, in the intergenerational homes, that youth are often tasked with taking care of their elders when the, older folks have to go to work or go run errands or things like that. So I think it's really important to include youth in some of the education about aging and dementia. And I know in my own work with, men, young men, middle-aged men, many times they don't think about getting older. I talked to men who are in their 30s or 40s, and they didn't even think they'd live that long. So to get young people to think about aging and that they will someday, hopefully, reach, their grandparents' age, can be a difficult thing to get them that engaged. So it's good to have those intergenerational interactions in those programs. So Jordan, what in your experience, or would a dementia-friendly Indigenous community look like? Or have you seen some?
So I have seen a few. I have a few examples I could share that I have permission to share. So one is Galena, Alaska. They have done a phenomenal job of educating their entire community about dementia. Of course, it's a smaller community, but still, I think that was a really big effort in getting everyone to just know the basic warning signs, what are the behaviors. And the mission of that was to not only educate the community to be aware, so if something is happening, they know to first assess that rather than something else, but also to reduce or bring down the barriers of ageism or fear of being around older adults. So they'd visit the care facility in Galena and actually want to be in there, be around older adults, which as a gerontologist, I know many of my students have never been around older adults. Surprisingly, people in their 20s live further away from their grandparents and aren't raised by their elders. So that's a reality that we're seeing more of. Another example, I think Becky brought up a really great point, is the youth. So there's a tribal nation here in Minnesota that every 5th and 6th grade class has a afternoon of dementia training because they are becoming the caregivers for their grandparents who may have dementia. So every student in those 2 grades are trained to know some basic behaviors, what are the warning signs, how to help with different things. And so they can go home and not be scared, but have a general idea of what to do or who to talk to if they need help. So that's a great idea. The other one that is also happening in Alaska, but also here, referring back to Title VI, is the Elder Nutrition Program. These are individuals who are also in the homes, usually a lot, delivering meals, teaching them some of the basic warning signs, talking about what to look out for, so they can alert somebody back, either the Title VI office or their family, to let them know they're noticing something's going on. There's a project we're starting here, training the CHRs who are going in to do visits with the family members to also document if they're noticing behaviors, to relay back to the tribal clinic, to then, just kind of say, oh, we need to do a medical checkup. Could you come in? And that facility does do memory checks with general health screening. So it's a part of a bigger thing and not just, you're here for memory and we have concerns. So it's more wrapped into, let's do everything. And we're also going to do that. So I guess what I would like to, an ideal dementia-friendly community would be that everyone's aware of what it is and is open to that and just kind of learning and not being afraid to offer help for their elders if they need it, or younger people. There's other types of dementia that are affecting not just older adults, but.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Dave, I wanted to ask too, we've talked a lot about tribal elders and elders living in their communities, but we know that more than 70% of American Indians now live in urban areas. And I'm wondering, have you come across any or know of any urban Indian programs related to dementia and healthy aging?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, Jordan. You might have some ideas, but I know in some states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, tribes and urban Indian centers are working together on things, but I see the urban Indian centers as historically and currently so tremendously underfunded that their capacity to really do anything significant around dementia, I think, is still fairly minimal. And it's one of the great weaknesses we have, I think, as we try to deliver Indian healthcare to urban communities. There are our mothers and our brothers and our sisters, as well as those of us who still live on reservations.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. Jordan, do you know of any urban?
No, I can't think of any either. I'm sure I would hope there's some out there. I guess this is where I would also wish Dr. Blythe Winchester was on, because she might be also a resource that may know. But yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of any. So it could be another project for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Sorry. We have been promoting Wisdom Warriors as a tool to engage and educate the CHRs so they're able to spot dementia, because Wisdom Warriors is chronic disease self-management, but it's been indigenized. So we're having agencies who have us train their CHR staff in CDSME, which is Wisdom Warriors, and that helps overall health, helps the CHRs notice the overall health of the elders, but we definitely do a little focus on dementia because it's pretty prevalent in our elders.
Right. Yeah, I think, I mean, as you all know, when we live in urban areas, we kind of just get mixed with everybody else, and people don't realize, you know, that we still have our own, all of us, you know, have our own cultures and traditions that we still want to engage in. And we do have, you know, organizations and community centers here like Daybreak Star and others that, you know, host powwows and things like that. But yeah, I haven't seen any that are related to healthy aging or dementia or anything like that either. So a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you know, with the youth support, we have a project and it's been difficult because elders aren't getting together. So it's been harder to reach the youth that they live with because we wanted to do some focus groups with Native youth and young adults who live in a household with an elder who has dementia or memory problems, and talk with them about, you know, their experiences, and then to make a zine. So we have a Native person who would guide them in making a zine. I'm not sure if everybody knows what a zine is, but it can take many different forms. It can be just a single piece of paper where somebody writes. It can be text, it can be pictures, but represents how they feel about something. It can be a booklet. It can be kind of a brochure sort of thing. It can be media. So they come in many different forms, and they've been used in the past to promote different, you know, agendas, topics. And so we hired someone to help the youth through Zoom make a zine, just a one-page representation of their experience. And when we're finally able to get all of the youth in these focus groups, because everything is on Zoom now, and it's been difficult to recruit youth and elders because they haven't been getting together, we'll publish a booklet with some of the information from the focus groups and the zines that they make. So we're really excited about that. And I haven't seen many programs here in the US for youth who have parents or grandparents with Alzheimer's disease. So I've seen in the UK that they do have a program, but that's more for parents who have early onset Alzheimer's or dementia. So they have some great resources as well, and kind of comic book sort of information for children to learn about Alzheimer's disease.
This is Dave. I think the zines are a great idea. And Jordan, I think that thought of educating every 5th and 6th grader in a tribe on dementia and elders is brilliant. Congratulations. That's good. And unique.
Right. And even, you know, just healthy aging, because we know that chronic diseases can be a problem in some communities. And those, you know, are vascular risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Well, if there's nothing else from our panelists, I'd like to open it up to questions. And you can either type them in the chat and I'll read them, or you can just raise your hand and we will call on you. So I think Marcy had a question or wanted to ask a question.
Yes, I'm going to try to figure out how to articulate this well, but for the panelists, I was thinking Becky might even be able to talk about it because Becky, you were talking about how sometimes stigma can prevent people from participating in support groups. And so a lot of my work revolves around helping people understand the connections between managing chronic diseases and brain health. But I always, when I teach that, say to someone, you know, it's very important to not assume because someone gets a form of dementia that it's related to their lifestyle. It may or may not have been. And so just wondering, when you're trying to educate people about the connection, healthy aging and brain health and dementia, how you do that in a way that doesn't reinforce some of those stereotypes or stigma that people are already afraid of being labeled with. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I don't know if I have enough education to answer that, but my fallback tool is always chronic disease self-management program. And it does go into dementia a little bit. It goes into different causes of dementia. So I really stress during those lessons, it may not have been the alcohol, it may not have been the drugs, it may be hereditary or a disease. And we try to keep all the avenues open so nobody gets peg-holed as being this or that, and that's why you have dementia. But also in chronic disease self-management, you are limited as to what you teach because you have to maintain fidelity to the program. So it works both ways, and I always stress that I'm not an expert, I just know what I've experienced. So a frightening thing that I think we haven't mentioned yet is folks with long haul COVID. Dementia is definitely part of their disease process. And if we thought the silver wave was coming, I think it's just been really added to by the COVID long haulers.
Thanks, Becky. So so I'll let Joel go, and then I'll read a couple of questions that are in the chat. Joel.
So my question to the panelists is, what are your thoughts around making things, if you're trying to help the tribal communities, and Becky, I was thinking about what you were talking about with support groups, for example. Do we want to bring a standard support group to the tribe, or do we need to be looking at a different type of support group? You know, I could talk to this if you're talking about a rural community and on things that we changed about support groups. We don't call them necessarily a support group. You might have a support potluck. People are used to going to potlucks. No, that I'm just trying to show an example of how you can change support groups around. Do we need to do the same thing with the tribal community? And then I'm also running into the same thing with our education programs with the Alzheimer's Association, that they aren't oriented to the tribal communities. They're, you know, they just aren't. And what changes, you know, do we need to make with those? And are you aware of anybody who's nationally who's working on those kinds of things?
I will answer based on my experience from Wisdom Warriors. And we've done exactly that with the chronic disease self-management program, because nobody talks like that. Nobody, well, I'm going to the chronic disease self-management program meeting tonight. We're going to the Wisdom Warrior meeting. Let's make it easy, let's make it simple, and let's make it relevant to the culture that you're dealing with. So we incorporate all of the lessons of CDSME, but we do it using our language, our food, our history, and our culture. And that's easy to do for any Indigenous or different than Caucasian culture. So, and I think it needs to be done because we tend to flock together in our communities based on our experience, our race. So having a Spanish speaking, having an Arab speaking, having a Japanese speaking group. And support group is not a fun word. I agree with you totally. So everybody put their heads together. What's another word for support group that doesn't make you appear that you need support? You just happen to be there and we're talking about it.
Right. Well, in New Mexico, there was a men's drum group and they would get together, and that was one way to get people to start talking to men to talk about health. Dave, were you going to say something?
Yeah, also in New Mexico, the Alzheimer's Association for the state has produced some radio shows about dementia for Indian country, and they have got hundreds of responses and listeners, and their outreach, I think, is really remarkable, and would probably be good for all of us to check in and be on closer terms with that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we have some questions in the chat, about 5 right now. So I'm curious, this is from Heidi. I'm curious if any of the panelists know of research on intergenerational trauma and potential links with dementia.
So
George?
I'll go first because I just attended a training on that topic last week. And of course, I can't find it right now, but I can definitely share resources. There's another really great article in the Gerontologist. Wendy Holko out of Canada has done some work around that area. It's definitely an area that needs a lot more attention based on what I've been looking for in terms, there's just not much out there. But there are a few seminal pieces of work out there that are starting these conversations because it does even come up in our meetings with elders or their younger family members. So,
yeah. Thank you. And then for Becky from Aziz, I believe you mentioned that the tribal elders are not willing to come into town. Can you share why that is? Thanks.
Typically, like on the reservation that I live on, we are a community of Indigenous people of mostly one tribe. And if you go into town, it's non-tribal people who don't understand our culture, with whom we have a very poor relationship because of the history that we have gone through with the non-natives. And most of the agencies in the town where we live are run by non-Indigenous people. So when we come in, it's kind of a clash of cultures. So that's why we've worked really hard to make sure that, like myself, I'm Indigenous and I'm employed to reach out to the Indigenous people. So when our non-native agency reaches out, they have a native face to talk to and to look to, because I look like them and I speak like them and I am them.
And Leilani asked, does anyone know of programs that focus on nutrition and alternatives to cultural favorites that contribute to chronic disease? So Becky, the chronic disease self-management program, your Wisdom Warriors definitely does that.
It does, but I tell you what, I get in trouble the first time I bring up that fry bread is not Indigenous food and it's not good for you. So yeah, there's a lot of pushback on that one. But we do lessons on working with Indigenous food, how to grow it, how to harvest it, how to use it. And once the elders learn that, they often take it to the children and teach them. So that new knowledge is being passed down. But we've also been fighting at government levels about the commodities food being so, it's crappy. I'm sorry, it's just crappy. So
Yeah.
we're fighting on more than one front with that one.
Right. And we know that, you know, settler colonialism has taken Native people away from their traditional foods. And, you know, that knowledge in many places has been lost. And so that reconnection to land and, you know, growing things, hunting, harvesting things really needs to continue and be revitalized in places where it can be. So thank you. Another, I am Choctaw. My husband of 43 years was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years ago at the age of 60. We are in early stage 5 at this time. My question is, where can I go to find respite care for myself? I currently live in Spokane, Washington, but we're relocating to Seattle in the spring to live with my younger son for help. So where can she find respite care for herself? And she'll be here in Seattle, but is in Spokane right now. I'm not sure. Joel, do you know any?
Yes, there's a elder place here in Spokane that she could contact while they're still here in Spokane. As far as Seattle goes, I'll put my contact information, and maybe she could contact me, and I'll work with our staff over in Seattle to find some place for her.
Okay, great, thank you. I've seen like day centers for elders with Alzheimer's, where caregivers can take them for the day, and they're there, and so that gives people respite.
I would reach out to the area agency on aging in her area. I believe the Spokane tribe has their own tribal area agency on aging, but also reach out to the elder coordinator at the Spokane tribe, and they may know of the family caregiver support program who does exactly that. They support the caregiver. So
Wonderful.
Yeah, area agency on aging.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from Erica, very curious as to healthcare/law enforcement education on Indigenous perspectives. I can see where programming and insensitive personal care approaches could cause huge, where did it go? Just huge damage to anyone seeking help. That was a comment from Marcy. Dave, can you please put in the chat the name of the radio show you mentioned, the one in New Mexico? And Patrick asks, I am curious if any of the panelists could comment on elder engagement activities during COVID. So have there been elders that have been able to get together either through Zoom or other methods during COVID?
Our wisdom warriors in Skagit County have kept their monthly meetings going, and they do it through Zoom, but it's not as effective, of course, as being face to face. They're so lonely. The elders are so lonely. If I get them on the phone, I know I have to give at least 30 minutes because they just want to talk. Yeah.
And Jordan, how has your research been going since it is with elders? I know that it is, we've had to delay all our interactions unless people can get online, and that takes a lot of support and materials to make that happen.
Right. So our current caregiver project's been on hold since last May 2020. Because of that, and we're learning through conversations with the tribal health directors that a lot of the caregivers and the elders in the community are fearful of even getting together. So then they don't leave their houses. They don't actually want people to come into their home, even though the last few months there hasn't been a mask mandate, because a lot of our reservations here were really good about shutting down quickly. But for good reasons, they've had their fears. And on top of that, the infrastructure for internet, cell phones is so poor that you can't even Zoom in to say hi. You can't, unless you have a landline. It's really challenging for them to stay connected. So our research is still on hold. We could try to go out and do in-person, socially distant focus groups or Zoom meetings or regular meetings, but it's been challenging. So we're just kind of waiting and following the lead of the community.
Right. Yeah, there's the technology equity as well. Dave, yeah.
Pass this off lightly. There was a question about Navajo, or about the state of New Mexico Alzheimer's Association's outreach. the director of outreach is a gentleman named Ron Epps, E-P-P-E-S. He's a marvelous guy, and they have or can send you a full set of the recording, and there were thousands of people attending of the Alzheimer's Association programming about dementia. If you still have trouble, please reach me directly. You can do it through Kaimi, I think, and I'd be happy to dive in and help you if I can.
Thanks, Dave. And I know Dave, who was the founder of the National Indian Council on Aging and their director for many, many years, and a couple of my colleagues, Patrick Johansson and Gary Ferguson, were just at the NICOA conference in Reno not too long ago. So I'd like to just hear from you all if there were any particular messages or other things that you heard during that conference about Indigenous elders and dementia or aging, especially during COVID, during that conference. Dave?
Yeah, I met with some of those folks and was highly impressed. They're doing just an outstanding job. I think the National Indian Council on Aging has a good website, and they've got a great conference summary. And again, I offer my phone and my email, dave@iasquared.org, and I'd be glad to personally try to help any of you if you'd like to make connections in that direction.
Thank you, Dave. Patrick,
I would just comment and echo Becky's Bendixen's comment about elders being willing to share and talk and raise awareness of what priorities are in terms of the way that we should conduct Alzheimer's disease research. And I think some cross-cutting themes was, that we learned. We had several listening sessions where we presented a Alzheimer's disease research protocol to elders who participated in NICOA. And some cross-cutting themes were that there should be options in terms of levels of participation, and that there should be recognition of traditional beliefs. And we heard these beliefs across many different tribal members who participated from different tribes, in terms of recognition of beliefs about separating the body after death. There was also, a lot of people raised the issue of importance of prayer as a medicine, and as well as that, researchers have to recognize that many folks also use traditional medicine. But I would just echo that people were very willing to share and talk, and we were very fortunate to have this window of opportunity to meet with elders during this time, because I'm not sure to what degree we will have conferences in person, in the near future. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Patrick.
Can I make one quick comment? Another great resource is the Banner Alzheimer's Institute and their Native American outreach program. I think I saw Nicole's name on here. Another great resource doing phenomenal work around supporting caregivers and people with dementia. So that's another resource.
And Banner's located in Phoenix, Arizona?
I believe, yes.
Right. Well,
And Amy, can I just say one more thing? I just want to.
Oh, please, yes.
Just to echo Dave's comment about NICOA being a tremendous resource. They worked with us to make sure that we had our own room during the conference and could set up our workshops. And I just want to thank them for their dedication to help us in getting the work done that we needed to get done during that time, and for disseminating our information. So thank you them and supporting our work.
It was amazing that elders were there at the conference too. All right, any other final questions before we wrap up here? Well, it's been an amazing, amazing panel. I thank you, Dave, Jordan, Becky, so very much. Gary wrote, I would add that elders and advocates are really interested in bright spots about, what is working across Indian country. So really exciting to have you here today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm super excited about this panel, and I was really happy to see all of you here today. I really appreciate your time, your attendance, and your questions and interest.